Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
And today we are tackling a really massive subject. We're diving into the biggest prison on Earth, a history of the occupied territories by the historian Ilan Pappé.
And I want to be crystal clear right out of the gate about what this deep dive is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't.
Right.
Because, usually when you see a title involving Israel, Palestine, or occupation, you immediately brace for a debate.
You expect a fight, a moral argument about who's right and who's wrong, or maybe a dry diplomatic history of who signed what treaty in 1993.
And we're doing none of that.
Absolutely none of it.
Zero. This is not a moral adjudication. This is a structural examination. We're looking at Pappé's book as a manual of institutional design. We're looking at the machinery.
That's the perfect word for it. Machinery.
Because
Pappé's central thesis, and look, it is a heavy one, is that the situation in the West Bank and Gaza isn't an accidental result of war. It's not some temporary state of emergency that just kind of dragged on for 50-plus years because of bad luck or, incompetent leadership.
No.
He argues it is a pre-configured, carefully, and I mean carefully designed, administrative model.
It's the difference between a car crash and a car factory. One is a sudden, chaotic event. The other is a system designed to produce a specific outcome day in and day out.
Exactly. And that distinction is where we get the title of this episode, Crisis in Perception. The crisis, according to the book's logic, isn't the conflict itself.
No.
The crisis is that the world perceives this as a temporary occupation that's just waiting for a political solution, while the documents, the actual blueprints he uncovers, show a system designed for permanence, a system of control.
So our mission today is to tear down that perception and look at the blueprints. And when I say blueprints, I mean that literally. We are going to look at the legal codes, the town planning maps, the bureaucratic incentives.
The whole architecture.
The whole architecture. We're going to move through the system design, then look at the incentives that keep it running, and finally, the outcomes, what Pappé calls the mega prison.
And honestly, for me, the most shocking part of this entire book, the thing that just stopped me in my tracks, was the timeline.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you ask anyone, the average person on the street, when the occupation of the West Bank began, they'll say June 1967, the Six-Day War.
Of course. Israel wins a defensive war. It captures these territories from Jordan and Egypt, and then it has to figure out, okay, now what do we do with them?
That's the standard narrative, right? The accidental empire.
That's the story we're told. But Pappé, he takes us back 4 years earlier, to the summer of 1963.
This was the aha moment for me. I mean, I was reading this chapter and I had to put the book down. 1963. That is 4 full years before a single shot was fired in the Six-Day War.
It's a sunny summer in Jerusalem. We are on the Givat Ram campus of Hebrew University. You can picture it, right? Beautiful stone buildings, pine trees.
Totally. And in one of the classrooms, there's a very specific, very unusual month-long course taking place.
Yeah, this isn't Philosophy 101.
Not even close. The students are a hand-picked cohort of military lawyers, officials from the Ministry of the Interior, and high-ranking Army officers.
And the syllabus for this summer course?
How to rule over a civilian population. They were essentially wargaming the administration of an occupation.
They were building the operating system.
That's it. It was known as the Shacham Plan, named after Colonel Michel Shacham. And we really need to stress the level of detail here. This wasn't some abstract discussion about international law.
No, this is practical.
Incredibly practical. They were drafting specific military orders. They were taking maps of the West Bank, which, remember, was part of Jordan at the time, and dividing it up into 8 specific administrative districts.
They even had the staff picked out. That's the part that it blew my mind. They had a list, a personnel chart. They knew who was going to be the military governor for the Nablus district.
They knew who would be the Minister of Tourism for the occupied territories.
A Minister of Tourism for a territory they hadn't even conquered yet. I mean, what does that say?
It speaks to a supreme level of, I don't know if it's confidence or just anticipation. They saw it as an inevitability.
But why? Why were they so convinced in '63 that this was going to happen?
Well, the military leadership at the time, specifically the Chief of General Staff, looked at the region and saw basically a house of cards. They thought the Hashemite kingdom in Jordan was unstable and might collapse. They believed another war with the Arab states was inevitable, sooner or later.
And they were haunted by a previous failure.
They were haunted by the ghost of 1956, the Sinai campaign.
Right. During the Suez Crisis, Israel briefly occupied the Gaza Strip.
And by all accounts, it was a total mess. It was chaotic, There was looting, confusion, no clear chain of command for managing the civilian population. They were forced to pull out under American pressure. But the lesson the Israeli military took home wasn't occupation is bad.
No, the lesson was we were bad at occupation.
We need better management. Next time, we need a plug-and-play government. They wanted to ensure that the moment the army moved in, the military government could be switched on instantly. No chaos, no power vacuum, just immediate bureaucratic control.
And this all culminates in one of the most cinematic details Pappé describes, the argaz.
The box.
It sounds like something out of a spy thriller, doesn't it?
It really does. So you flash forward to May 1967. The tension in the region is at a breaking point. Nasser is moving troops into the Sinai. The Israeli public is genuinely terrified. There's this feeling that a second Holocaust is on the horizon.
But inside the military command?
They are calm. They are ready. And the prospective military governors, those men who had been tapped for their jobs 4 years earlier, are summoned to a base.
And they are physically handed a box, a kit, an argaz.
Literally a box.
So what's in the box? What's in the occupation starter kit?
Okay, so it's the user manual for running the territories. It contains detailed maps of the specific districts they would be responsible for. It contains the list of key personnel. It contains pre-written Arabic translations of the laws they are about to enforce.
Wow.
And it contains 2 books. And the contradiction between these 2 books, well, it basically explains the next 50-plus years of history.
Okay, lay it out for us. Book 1.
Book 1 is a dense academic treaty on international law. It's called The Occupation of Enemy Territory by a scholar named Gerhard von Glahn. This is the official guide.
And what's the gist of von Glahn's book? What does international law say about military occupation?
He says, and the Geneva Conventions agree, that occupation is a temporary state of custody. The occupier is a trustee, a caretaker. You cannot change the local laws. You cannot seize private property. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, can you move your own civilian population into the occupied territory.
So the whole premise is, keep the seat warm until a peace treaty is signed.
That's it. Don't break anything, don't steal anything, and for God's sake, don't get comfortable.
But then there's book 2.
Well, it wasn't a book so much as a stack of documents, a binder. And in it were the British mandatory emergency regulations.
And this is where the irony gets so thick you could cut it with a knife.
It is absolutely staggering. These are regulations the British Empire enacted in Palestine in 1945. And why did they enact them? To crush the local insurgencies, to crush the Arab revolt, yes, but also to crush the Jewish underground groups, the Irgun, the Stern Gang.
For the very people who would go on to found the State of Israel and lead its government.
The very same. Menachem Begin, who would later become prime minister, publicly called these specific British laws Nazi legislation. He said they were unparalleled in any enlightened country.
And what did they allow?
Everything. Administrative detention, which means arresting someone and holding them indefinitely without trial. They allowed for wide-scale censorship. They allowed for the demolition of family homes as collective punishment and the expulsion of residents. They were the most draconian tools of colonial control imaginable.
And yet, here they are in the 1967 box.
There they were. The Israelis took the British laws, scratched out the words High Commissioner, wrote in General Military Governor, and made that the law of the land in the newly conquered territories.
So why, I mean, beyond the efficiency, why use the very laws of the colonial enemy you hated and fought against?
Because they worked. They were ruthlessly efficient. And, crucially, it gave them a legal loophole. They could argue, we aren't introducing new draconian laws, we're simply applying the existing legal framework of the territory. It provided this very thin veneer of continuity.
So on day 1 of the occupation, you have this crisis in perception perfectly established. You have the von Glahn book, the international law book, sitting in the box, signaling to the world, don't worry, we're following the rules, this is temporary.
That's the storefront.
But the actual tool being used, the engine running the whole thing, is the emergency regulations, which are designed for total, permanent suppression.
It's the difference between the public relations statement and the internal operating manual. The storefront is temporary custody. The back office is permanent control.
And this brings us right to the legal architecture they set up. Because they had a really difficult puzzle to solve, didn't they?
The fundamental Zionist paradox.
They wanted the land, but they didn't want the people.
Right. Think it through. If you officially annex the West Bank, make it legally part of Israel, then under democratic principles, you have to give citizenship to the million-plus Palestinians living there.
And if you give them citizenship, they vote.
They vote, and if they vote in large numbers, the Jewish demographic majority of the state is threatened. So that's off the table.
So you can't annex it. But obviously you don't want to give it back either.
So what do? You create a legal void, a state of exception. They decided to treat the territories as de facto part of Israel, meaning Israel controls the water, the electricity, the borders, the airspace, the currency,
All the important stuff.
all the levers of sovereignty. But de jure by law, they are declared to be outside of Israel.
It's Schrödinger's territory. It is simultaneously Israeli and not Israeli, and the state it's in depends entirely on who you are and what the government needs it to be in that moment.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And Pappé describes how this works on the ground through the concept of the crawling green line. So the green line is the 1949 armistice line, the border.
The border that, on paper, separates Israel proper from the occupied West Bank.
Right. Now, if you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, that line is a concrete wall. It is very, very real. You cannot cross it into Israel without a hard-to-get permit. The Israeli military law applies to you because you are on the other side of that line.
But for an Israeli settler.
For an Israeli settler, the line doesn't exist. It's been functionally erased.
Explain that. How does that work in practice?
An Israeli citizen can get in their car in Tel Aviv, drive east, cross the green line without even seeing a sign, and arrive at a settlement like Ariel, deep in the West Bank. The road signs are in Hebrew. The police who pull him over for speeding are Israeli police. And most importantly, the laws that apply to him, contract law, criminal law, property law, are Israeli civil laws.
So he carries his legal rights with him like a bubble.
He carries the Israeli legal system with him. The green line has crawled or moved eastward to encompass his settlement, but it has stayed in place for the Palestinian village right next door.
So you have two completely different legal systems operating on the exact same patch of dirt, and the system that applies to you is determined entirely by your ethnicity.
That is the very definition of the system. And Pappé's point is that this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a clumsy evolving policy. It was the only possible design to solve that paradox. Keep the land for settlement, but keep the people under military law to avoid giving them rights.
Okay, so we've got the legal software, the British emergency regulations, the dual legal system, the crawling green line. Now we need the hardware, the physical engineering of the land. Because you can't control 1 million people just with paperwork. You need bulldozers. You need concrete.
And this is where we have to talk about Yigal Allon and the Allon Plan.
A key figure right after the '67 war.
Absolutely. Allon was a minister in the government and a key strategist. And immediately after the war, I mean, we were talking weeks, not months or years, he presented a map to the cabinet, a vision.
And he looked at the West Bank not as a place of, religious heritage or history, but as a geometry problem.
That's exactly it. Geometry. He saw the physical shape of the West Bank. It's kind of kidney-shaped, right?
Yeah.
And he realized that if the Palestinians were allowed to keep that shape intact, they would eventually have the basis for a state.
Because they'd have continuity. A contiguous territory means a contiguous society, a contiguous economy.
And he wanted to prevent that. He wanted to break the shape.
He wanted to drive wedges into it.
He wanted to drive massive wedges of Israeli control into it. So we need to visualize this map. Imagine the West Bank. Allon drew two major lines, or wedges, that would be filled with Israeli settlements and military bases.
Okay, wedge one.
Wedge one was the Jordan Valley, the entire eastern strip of the West Bank bordering the Jordan River.
And the strategic goal of that is pretty obvious.
It completely cuts the West Bank off from Jordan, from the rest of the Arab world to the east. It encircles the Palestinian population.
Okay, and wedge two?
Wedge 2 was a corridor running from Jerusalem east towards Jericho. This is the area that would later become the massive settlement block of Ma'ala Adumim.
And the purpose of that wedge?
To bisect the West Bank, to cut it in half. You separate the northern population centers, cities like Nablus and Jenin,
All right.
from the southern ones, Hebron and Bethlehem. You turn that single kidney shape into two smaller, disconnected cantons.
It's pure divide and rule, but on a geographical, almost geological scale.
It's territorial engineering. But look, this wasn't just drawing lines on a map. This required taking land, massive amounts of land. And again, they had to do it in a way that looked legal. They couldn't just send soldiers in and say, this is ours now.
So they went back to the law books.
And this is where we get one of the most creative legal loopholes I've ever come across, the Mawat Land Code.
Mawat? What does that mean?
It's an old Ottoman Turkish term. It literally means dead land.
Dead land.
In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was trying to encourage agriculture and taxation. So they passed a law that said, If a piece of land is so far from a village that you can't hear a rooster crow from the village center.
A rooster crow.
Seriously, the rooster's crow standard. If it's that far away and it is uncultivated, it doesn't belong to the village, it belongs to the sultan. It is dead.
So this was basically an old tax and land use law.
Right. Fast forward to the 1970s and 80s, Israeli state lawyers dust off this obscure Ottoman law. They look at the rocky hilltops of the West Bank. These were areas that weren't being farmed for wheat or olives because they were, rocky, but they were absolutely being used.
As grazing land.
Exactly. They were the communal pasture lands for the Palestinian villages in the valleys below.
But the Israeli state had a different interpretation.
The Israeli state said, look, no crops, this is uncultivated, it's more than a rooster's crow from the village center, therefore this is mawat, this is dead land, therefore it is now state land.
And once it's declared state land,
the state can lease it to whoever it wants. And, well, miraculously, they always seem to lease it to the World Zionist Organization for the construction of new settlements.
I'm trying to think of an analogy.
Think of it like this. Imagine you have a big backyard. You don't mow one section of it because you like the wildflowers that grow there, or maybe your kids just use it to play catch.
It's still your yard.
It's still your yard. But then your homeowners association comes along, points to an obscure bylaw from 1850 that says any unmanicured lawn is deemed abandoned, declares that part of your yard to be community property, and then immediately builds a swimming pool on it for a different neighborhood.
And if you complain, they just wave the bylaw in your face. It's legal, see? It says right here, dead land.
That's the system. It launders dispossession through bureaucracy.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like violent conquest. It looks like a zoning dispute.
And they didn't just apply this logic in the West Bank. We have to talk about Gaza for a minute, because people often treat Gaza as this totally separate, unique issue.
But structurally, Pappé argues, it was the same plan, just adapted for a different geography. In Gaza, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin proposed what he called the Five Fingers Plan.
That sounds ominous.
It was. Gaza is this tiny, incredibly dense strip of land. Rabin's plan was to build 5 blocks of Israeli settlements, like 5 fingers, that would reach from the Israeli border deep into the strip.
And the goal was the same as the wedges.
Identical. To slice the Palestinian population into smaller, disconnected chunks. To break the continuity of the Gaza Strip, making it impossible to govern as a single unit. Fragmentation.
So whether it's the Ilan Plan's wedges in the West Bank or Rabin's 5 fingers in Gaza, the strategic objective is always the same. Divide and rule. Fragmentation.
And this all leads us to the core metaphor of Pappé's book, the prison.
And we need to be clear, he's not using this word just as rhetoric. He's not just trying to be provocative.
No, he's using it as a structural definition. He asks, what defines a prison? A prison is a space where a population is controlled by an external authority, where their movement is fundamentally restricted, and where they are stripped of their civil and political rights.
And he brings in the architectural concept of the panopticon.
The panopticon. This is the theoretical, perfect prison designed by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham and later analyzed by Michel Foucault. Imagine a circular prison building. The cells are arranged around the outer wall. In the very center, there is a guard tower.
But the trick is the windows of the tower.
Exactly. The windows are one-way glass, or they're shuttered. The guard in the tower can see into every single cell, but the prisoners in the cells cannot see into the tower.
So they don't know if they're being watched.
They never know. Is the guard watching me right now? Is he watching my neighbor? Is he asleep? Is the tower even empty tonight? But because they might be watched at any given moment, they have to behave as if they are being watched at every moment.
They begin to police themselves. The control gets inside your head.
That is the crisis in perception at the individual level. The occupation becomes an internalized system. You don't go to that protest, you don't write that critical article because you know your travel permit might be revoked, you know your brother's work permit could be canceled. The surveillance is so pervasive that you become your own warden.
So Pappé takes this prison metaphor and divides the history of the occupation into 2 distinct models, Model A and Model B.
Model A was what he calls the open-air prison. This was the system that ran from roughly 1967 until 1987, the start of the First Intifada.
This was the era of the so-called enlightened occupation, or good occupation.
That was the branding, for sure.
Yeah.
The idea was to create an invisible occupation. Moshe Dayan, the famous defense minister, famously told his staff, I want the Arab to wake up in the morning, go to work, come home, have his dinner, and never see an Israeli soldier.
How on earth do you occupy millions of people without them seeing you?
You do it with economics.
Yeah.
This is the incentives part of our deep dive. Israel opened the gates. They gave out hundreds of thousands of work permits, allowing Palestinians to work in Israel, in construction, in agriculture, in restaurants.
And this created a huge flow of cash into the West Bank and Gaza.
A huge flow. The standard of living, in material terms, actually went up significantly compared to the previous Jordanian and Egyptian eras. More people had refrigerators, televisions.
But it was a trap, wasn't it?
It was a golden cage. It was designed to create total economic dependency. If you're a Palestinian father in the 1970s, and the only way you can feed your family is your construction job in Tel Aviv, you are not going to rock the boat. You are going to be quiet. You're going to tell your teenage sons to stay out of trouble.
It effectively outsourced the suppression of dissent to the heads of Palestinian households.
That's a great way to put it. And for 20 years, it largely worked. The world looked at the situation and said, hey, you know, the bridges to Jordan are open for trade, people are working, the economy's growing, it's not so bad.
The occupation was invisible.
But then, 1987, the system crashed. The first intifada breaks out.
The open-air model failed because, at the end of the day, people desire dignity and freedom more than they desire a better refrigerator. The Palestinian population rose up, mass protests, commercial strikes, and, most famously, kids throwing stones at soldiers. The invisible occupation suddenly became very, very visible.
And the Israeli state pivoted. The system had to adapt. It pivoted hard. They moved from Model A to Model B, from the open-air prison to the maximum security prison.
The stick replaces the carrot.
Completely. If Model A was about the economic exploitation of Palestinian labor, Model B was about exclusion and punishment. The work permits were canceled en masse. The checkpoints, which had been relatively fluid, became hard, permanent borders.
Right.
And this is when we see the policy of closure become routine.
Explain what closure is as a policy.
Closure is a form of collective punishment. Let's say a teenager from a village near Ramallah throws a Molotov cocktail at an army jeep. The army doesn't just go looking for that specific teenager.
No.
They seal the entire village. They roll in massive concrete blocks and dirt mounds and block the main roads. No one goes in, no one goes out. You can't get to your job in the next town. You can't get to the hospitals. Your kids can't get to the university.
Then for how long?
Could be days. Could be weeks. It depends. It effectively turns the entire village into a solitary confinement cell to punish it for the actions of one person.
And this is also when the policy of punitive house demolitions really ramps up. Pappé cites some staggering numbers here. Between 1967 and 1982, something like 1,338 homes were demolished.
And we have to be really clear about what a punitive demolition is. This isn't about a building being constructed without a permit.
Yeah.
This is your son or daughter is a suspect in an attack. They haven't been convicted in a court of law. They are just a suspect. The army shows up at your house at 2 in the morning, gives your entire family 10 minutes to grab whatever belongings they can, and then they bring in the bulldozers and reduce your family home to rubble.
It's medieval. It's visiting the sins of the son upon the father.
It is designed to create a deterrent cost so high that families in the wider community will actively suppress their own members from engaging in resistance. But as we've seen over and over, it often just creates more rage and desire for revenge.
Now, you would think that living under this kind of maximum security regime, or for that matter, enforcing it, would be exhausting. Constant tension, constant violence.
It is. But Pappé argues that one of the most powerful tools of the system, one of its greatest strengths, was boredom, bureaucratic routinization.
That's a mouthful. What does it mean?
It means making the extraordinary feel normal and mundane. If you want to control a population for decades, you don't want constant high drama. You want paperwork. The occupation became a universe of permits and forms.
Right.
You need a form to dig a well on your own land. You need a permit to visit your sick aunt in Jerusalem. You need a license to export your tomatoes across the Green Line. You need a permit to build a new room on your house.
And the people processing these forms, the ones with the power of life and death over a farmer's livelihood,
are just kids. They're bored 19-year-old Israeli conscripts sitting in air-conditioned offices, stamping papers day in and day out as part of their military service. They aren't evil in some grand villainous sense. They're just clerks following a manual. But that bored clerk with a single stamp has the power to approve or deny, to build or to crush.
It's Hannah Arendt's banality of evil.
It is very much that. It diffuses responsibility across the entire system. The soldier in the checkpoint says, "Don't blame me, I'm just following orders from the civil administration." The clerk at the civil administration says, "I'm just following the regulations." The politician who writes the regulations says, I'm just following the security advice from the army.
And no single person feels responsible, yet the machine just grinds on.
Exactly. We also have to talk about the role of the settlers in this new maximum security phase, because their function changes, doesn't it? In the early days, they were mostly strategic pawns in the Ilan plan, creating those wedges.
Right, often secular, state-sponsored pioneers.
But by the late 70s and into the 80s, with the rise of the Likud party, the settler movement becomes much more ideological. It becomes messianic, religious. These aren't just people looking for cheap state-subsidized housing anymore. They are people who believe they have a divine right to every inch of the land.
But the state still needed incentives to get the more normal Israelis to move there, right? Not everyone is a religious zealot.
Oh, absolutely. And they did that by declaring the settlements national priority zones.
Which sounds like a fancy term for a tax break.
It was a massive package of tax breaks and subsidies. You got cheap government-backed mortgages, you got subsidized education for your kids, you got income tax breaks. You could be a completely secular Israeli computer programmer who doesn't care about the Bible at all, but you move to a settlement because it's the only place you can afford a detached villa with a garden within commuting distance of Tel Aviv.
So you have the ideological spearhead, the true believers, and they're followed by the economic mass, people just looking for a better quality of life.
And once they are there, a critical mass of them, they demand security. They demand to be able to live a normal life. They demand roads that bypass the hostile Palestinian villages.
The bypass roads.
And so the state builds these huge modern highways that connect the settlements directly to Israel, often flying over or tunneling under the Palestinian towns.
Which further fragments the Palestinian territory.
Of course. It's another layer of bars on the prison cell. The Palestinians are left with the old, crumbling local roads, while the settlers speed past on their segregated highways.
Okay, I want to zoom out for a second, because while all of this is happening on the ground, the bulldozers, the permits, the checkpoints, the bypass roads, there's a whole other movie playing on the international stage.
The peace process.
Right, and this is where Pappé is perhaps at his most critical. He argues that the peace process wasn't a failed attempt to open the prison. He argues it was a successful attempt to renovate it and make it more manageable.
Whoa. Okay, that completely flips the entire narrative. Because we all grew up thinking the 90s, the Oslo Accords, Rabin and Arafat shaking hands on the White House lawn, that was the big breakthrough. That was the beginning of the end of the conflict.
It certainly felt like it at the time. There was so much hope. But Pappé says, ignore the speeches and the handshakes. Look at the text of the Oslo Accords. Look at the maps.
The map.
The maps. Oslo created the infamous ABC system of control. We mentioned the Swiss cheese reality earlier. This is where it gets codified into an international agreement. Okay, break it down for us. Area A.
Area A consists of the major Palestinian cities. Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, Bethlehem. These are the holes in the Swiss cheese. In these areas, the newly created Palestinian Authority was given full civil and security control. They could have their own police force, their own ministries.
On paper, that sounds like autonomy, even sovereignty.
It sounds like it. But Area A makes up less than 20% of the West Bank's territory. And crucially, it is non-contiguous. Every city is an island, completely surrounded by areas B and C.
Okay, so what is Area B?
Area B is mostly the Palestinian villages and rural areas surrounding the cities. Here, the deal was Palestinian civil control. They're in charge of garbage collection, schools, things like that. But Israeli security control, which means the Israeli army can enter Area B whenever they want for any reason.
And finally, Area C.
Area C is the cheese itself. It's over 60% of the West Bank. It contains all of the Israeli settlements, all of the bypass roads, almost all of the open land, the Jordan Valley, and most of the water resources. And it remained under full and exclusive Israeli military and civil control.
So if I'm a Palestinian and I want to drive from one area, a city, say Ramallah, to another area, a city like Nablus,
you have to pass through Area C. You have to go through the Israeli checkpoints. Israel still held all the keys to the prison. What Oslo did was allow the prisoners to manage their own cell blocks.
And the Palestinian Authority, the PA, effectively became the wardens.
That is the core of the structural critique. The Israeli leadership realized that patrolling the Kasbahs of Nablus and the refugee camps of Jenin was dangerous, expensive, and terrible for their international image. So why not let the Palestinians police themselves?
They outsourced the most difficult parts of the occupation.
They outsourced the internal security. The PA's security forces were trained to arrest the anti-occupation activists, the Hamas members, so that the Israeli army wouldn't have to. From a management perspective, it was a brilliant cost-saving measure for the occupation.
So from this viewpoint, Oslo didn't end the occupation, it just reorganized it. It made it more efficient, more sustainable, and more palatable to the international community.
And it provided the ultimate diplomatic cover. For the next 20 or 30 years, whenever a country or a human rights group criticized Israel's settlement expansion or its human rights record, the standard response was, but we are in a peace process. We are negotiating a final status. Don't do anything to disturb the delicate process.
It was a process that bought them time. And in that time, while the process was happening, the settler population in the West Bank doubled, and then it tripled.
Exactly. The temporary cover of the peace process allowed the permanent structures on the ground to be cemented into place, perhaps irreversibly.
We have to talk about Gaza's evolution specifically here, because after Oslo, its path really diverges from the West Bank's.
It really does. In 2005, Israel unilaterally pulled all of its soldiers and settlers out of the Gaza Strip, the disengagement.
And at the time, many people saw that as a hopeful sign, didn't they? Look, they are capable of dismantling settlements. Maybe the West Bank is next.
That was the hope. But Pappé argues it was just a shift in prison management style. Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister, was a pragmatist. He realized that keeping 8,000 Israeli settlers surrounded by 1.5 million hostile Gazans was a massive security nightmare. It was inefficient.
So they pulled the internal guards, the settlers, and the soldiers protecting them out of the prison yard.
And locked the main gate from the outside.
Yeah.
They shifted from the Five Fingers model of internal control to the ultimate maximum security model, the blockade.
A total siege.
A total siege. They control the land borders. They control the sea fishermen are only allowed to go out a few nautical miles, not enough to get to the deep water fish. They control the airspace drones are a constant presence. They control the population registry, who gets in and who gets out.
And they controlled the economy. There was that infamous diet policy.
That was the term used by Israeli officials, yes.
Yeah.
The goal of the blockade, as they described it, was to keep the Gazan economy on the very brink of collapse, but just above the level of a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe that would trigger a massive global intervention. A senior advisor said the goal was to put the Palestinians on a diet, but not to make them die of hunger.
It's a policy of de-development.
Precisely, to smash the productive capacity of the economy to ensure there is no base from which resistance can be organized. It's the ultimate containment strategy, a sealed box.
So we have the system design, we have the incentives, we have the outcomes. The question that really lingers for me, and I think for anyone reading this, is why does this system persist? I mean, most systems this complex and this brutal eventually collapse under their own weight or contradictions. This one has been running in one form or another for 57 years.
It's the key question. And Pappé offers what he calls a persistence analysis. A few key reasons why it doesn't fall.
Yeah.
First, and maybe most importantly, low political cost. Meaning that because of the peace process cover, and frankly, the diplomatic shield provided by the United States at the UN, Israel rarely faces serious international consequences like sanctions. Diplomatically, it has been a relatively cost-free occupation.
Okay, what's second?
Bureaucratic inertia. This system is now huge. It's a machine that employs tens of thousands of people. The officers in the civil administration, the private security contractors who run the checkpoints, the construction companies that build the separation walls, the tech companies that develop the surveillance gear. It's a massive industry, and industries have a powerful interest in their own survival.
And the third reason, the big one.
The demographic engineering. The system, from the perspective of its designers, works. It successfully solved that fundamental Zionist paradox. It allows Israel to control and exploit the land of the West Bank without enfranchising the people who live on it. As long as that core function is working, the incentive to fundamentally change it is very, very low.
I also want to touch on the global connection here, because Pappé makes a really interesting point towards the end of the book. He says the West Bank isn't just a local anomaly, it's become a laboratory.
The Palestine Laboratory. This is a concept that other writers, like Anthony Lowenstein, have explored in depth as well. The idea is that Israel develops and perfects its technologies of control in the West Bank, and Gaza surveillance drones, biometric scanners, automated gun turrets on the border walls, predictive policing algorithms.
And then it exports them.
And then it exports them with the ultimate marketing pitch. Field tested.
But battle proven.
Exactly. This facial recognition software was tested at a checkpoint in Hebron. This drone was used for targeted strikes in Gaza. And countries all over the world, democracies and dictatorships alike, are lining up to buy this tech. They want to know how to control their own restive populations, how to secure their borders, how to track dissidents.
So the architecture of control that was designed for this one specific place is actually spreading globally.
It is. Pappé suggests the West Bank is the vanguard of a new kind of 21st century security state. A state where your rights are determined by your risk profile, where your movement is constantly monitored, where the law can be suspended at any time in the name of security.
He calls this legal exceptionalism.
Right. The idea that you can create a zone, a legal black hole, where the regular laws of your country don't apply. We see it with Guantanamo Bay. We see it with offshore detention centers for refugees in places like Australia or the UK. The West Bank is perhaps the oldest and most sophisticated example of this.
So when we look at the West Bank, we aren't just looking at a faraway historical conflict. We might be looking at a preview of our own future.
That is the truly chilling thought at the end of this deep dive.
Which brings us all the way back to where we started, to the crisis in perception.
This is the final takeaway, I think. We have to stop looking at the conflict as a series of isolated events. The latest shooting, the latest UN resolution, the latest angry speech, and start looking at the underlying structure.
It's like looking at a building.
How so?
Well, you don't look at a massive stone fortress and ask, why is that wall standing there today? As if it's a surprise. You know it's standing there because an architect drew a blueprint, an engineer approved it, and a construction crew spent years building it with a specific purpose in mind.
It's not a temporary shelter that was thrown up in a storm.
It's a fortress. It was designed to be a fortress. And realizing that, really internalizing that, it changes everything. It means that waiting for peace is a fool's errand because the system, as Pappé presents it, isn't designed to produce peace. It is designed to produce control.
It's designed to manage a population, not to liberate it.
It forces you to stop looking at the facade and start demanding to see the blueprints.
Exactly. And that is what Ilan Pappé has tried to do with this book. He's handed us what he argues are the blueprints.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. I mean, from the classrooms of Javad Ram in 1963 to the dusty Ottoman law books about roosters, all the way to the high-tech surveillance checkpoints of today.
It's a heavy topic. It is a dense, difficult topic.
It is, but it feels absolutely necessary if you want to understand the mechanics, not just of this one conflict, but of how power and control can be structured in the modern world.
Indeed. It's a stark reminder that history isn't just a series of things that happen to people. Very often, it is a series of things that are designed for people.
That's a very provocative thought to leave us with. And the one thing I'm mulling over now is how this design mindset applies elsewhere. You know, where else in our own societies are we accepting temporary solutions that have somehow become permanent structures of control? What other temporary emergency measures have been in place for 10, 20, 50 years? That's something to think about.
Always question the temporary.
Absolutely. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.